Welcome to a world where ancient voices still whisper through the winds. Step into the timeless stories of native tribes, filled with sacred rituals, powerful legends, and deep-rooted wisdom. Grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and prepare to walk the path of spirit, strength, and mystery. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your roots matter here, if these stories move you. Give this video a like and subscribe for more sacred journeys. The drum beats are calling. Let the journey begin. Anatolian Ghost Tribes, the forgotten people who drank shadows and punished the moon in the cold, once stripped valleys of ancient Anatolia. There once lived a people who feared memory more than death. They built no monuments, carved no names into stone, and spoke of their ancestors only in hushed riddles. These were the Ghost Tribes, nomadic clans whose greatest law was to disappear. To them, being remembered was a curse. To be named after death was to invite the soul to linger and rot. Every death was treated as a spiritual emergency. The body, stripped of its identity, was buried before dawn. No ceremony, no mourners, no grieving allowed. A stone was placed in the mouth of the dead, not for symbolism, but as a spiritual lock. They believed that the final thought of a dying person could slip free if not trapped, whispering madness into the living. Silence was survival. Memory was danger. Children were not taught the names of the dead. Even a whisper of a grandparent's name was punished. Instead, the tribe passed on their stories through object and rhythm-woven belts, carved sticks, drums that beat in strange, rhythmic patterns meant to reflect events without using words. Their belief was clear. Once a name leaves the mouth, it becomes a door for spirits to walk back through. The Ghost Tribes did not build homes. They raised tents from animal hide and dismantled them every new moon. No structure could remain in one place longer than 29 days. To stay still was to invite recognition, and recognition meant decay. In some valleys, archaeologists found circles of stones where fires once burned, but never bones, never names, never tools that told who had lived there. The tribe made sure of it. Even their laws were built on erasure if a tribe member committed a taboo. Their punishment was not death, but deletion. No eye contact, no speech, no food shared. Within days, the person would be driven out by absence alone. They called it being made untouched. And once someone was untouched, they could never return, not even in stories. Over time, entire clans faded without trace. Their dialects vanished. Their gods were never written down. Only the rituals remained, passed along like ghosts themselves, whispered about by neighboring tribes who dared not speak their name aloud. The Ghost Tribes became myths, and yet their silence still echoes in those empty valleys where wind rolls over stone and nothing dares to stay for long. Because in the world of the Ghost Tribes, to be seen was to be hunted. And the shadow was only the beginning. In the minds of the Ghost Tribes, the shadow was never just a trick of the light. It was the body's second self, an imprint of memory, of sin, of everything unspoken. The tribes believed shadows could hold pain, carry lies, and cling to a person like invisible rot. And if a shadow refused to move freely with the sun, it meant guilt was festering beneath the skin. To cleanse this invisible corruption, they practiced a punishment known as the splitting. It took place when the sun reached its cruelest height. The accused was stripped to the waist and made to kneel on pale earth, while others formed a circle around them, chanting in fragmented rhythms. Then, with wooden staffs and animal bones, they struck the ground, not to harm the person, but to break the bond between shadow and flesh. Dust rose with every blow. The air shook with the sound of guilt being driven out. I stayed fixed on the shadow. If it stretched or flickered unnaturally, if it twisted despite stillness, the person was declared shadowful or soul poisoned by memory. Those branded in this way were not executed. That would give the shadow a martyr's death instead. They were blindfolded, taken to the edge of a desolate mountain, and left for the elements to erase. Children were taught to treat shadows like living beings. To step on another's shadow was considered an attack on their very soul. Accidents brought public apologies, and repeated offenses could lead to isolation. Even in games, shadows were never chased. Instead, they were honored with chalk circles and protective gestures. Before marriage, a couple would sit facing the setting sun. If their shadows overlapped cleanly without breaking apart, it was seen as a sign of pure union. But if one shadow resisted the other, if the lines blurred or trembled, then the bond was forbidden. They believed it meant one partner had secrets. The earth refused to hide Dot to the ghost tribes. The shadow was a mirror of the unseen self, and when that mirror cracked, they did not look away. They shattered it before it shattered them. Justice, in the ghost tribes, was not measured by evidence or witness. It was measured by breath. Among their most feared rituals was the trial of breath, a brutal custom that blurred the line between punishment and sacrifice. Guilt was not decided by human judgment, but by what the body could endure in silence. When someone was accused of betrayal, theft, or blasphemy, they were brought before the elders at dawn. A black bowl filled with crushed ash and sharpened. Animal teeth was prepared. No prayers were spoken. No pleas were allowed. The ash was believed to be spiritually neutral until touched by a lio's breath. The teeth, taken from foxes and scavenger birds, symbolized the god's judgment made physical. The accused would kneel, mouth held open by to split sticks. Ash and teeth were poured inside until the tongue could no longer move. Then, they were told to speak a single word, clear. If they bled, if they choked, if they coughed even slightly, the verdict was immediate. Guilt had been revealed by the myth's failure to hold truth. Innocence, they believed, required no effort. Truth would dissolve the ash-like fog in mourning. Like Dot, many feared the trial more than the punishment itself. The ritual was known to break the strong and silence the defiant. Even the innocent could fail if they panicked or breathed unevenly. Some collapsed afterward, mouths torn, unable to eat for days. Yet no one questioned the outcome. Pain was proof, and mercy was considered a weakness that invited disease. The tribe saw breath as sacred deech exhaled, carrying more than air. It carried spirit, it carried intention, and when laced with lies, they believed it turned to smoke that poisoned the tribe itself. In their world, lies left scars not only on the tongue but on the soul. And sometimes the truth was too sharp to speak at all. To the ghost tribes, the moon was not a distant celestial body, it was a watchful presence, a guardian of order and night. But when the moon dimmed, when its face vanished behind shadow, they believed betrayal had taken place. A lunar eclipse was not a marvel, it was a crime. They called it the night of the false eye. As darkness swallowed the moon, the tribe would gather in open fields, barefoot and bare-armed, to begin their ancient ritual of punishment. Drums pounded in uneven rhythms, echoing the beating of a wounded heart. Children screamed chants they barely understood. The air pulsed with fear. They believed the moon's silence during an eclipse gave safe passage to evil spirits, ones that live, ed through cracks in the sky and settled in the minds of the sleeping. To stop this invasion, they needed to strike first. Silver jewelry, once worn as protection, was fed to fire as the flames licked the precious metal. Elders whispered curses into the smoke, words meant to scar the moon's pride, to remind it that its light came with responsibility. The smoke was thought to rise directly into the heavens, marking the moon's wound. This symbolic injury was their form of justice. If the moon returned whole and bright the next night, It meant the punishment had been accepted. Women, especially young girls, were forbidden to raise their eyes during the eclipse. Tribal law claimed their gaze could restore the moon's power to soon nurturing its betrayal. Instead of condemning it, some were even blindfolded for the night, kept in closed tents, their silence seen as a protective shield against cosmic corruption. In these moments, the tribe did not fear the dark. They feared a light that chose to vanish without warning, without apology. In the Ghost Tribes, grief was not a public wound. It was a silence buried deep, tighter than any grave. They believed that sorrow, when spoken all shed in tears, became bait for the spirit world. To cry was to call the dead back, to hold them in a state of unrest, unable to cross the invisible bridge between worlds. And so, mothers were forbidden to weep when a child died. The mother was given one command: remain silent. Her tears were considered a tether, keeping the child's soul near the earth, where it would decay into something bitter and vengeful. If a mother broke down, even in the privacy of her own tent, she would be marked with thick red clay smeared from her forehead to her chin. This mark signaled failure, not as a parent, but as a protector of the soul's passage. Marked women were exiled for a season. No one spoke to them. No one shared food. They were not seen as cursed but contagious. Their sorrow was thought to spread, like wind carrying fire to the next spirit waiting to be born. Isolation was their penance, not just for the death, but for the noise that followed it. Children of the Ghost Tribes grew up with lullabies that ended in silence. No stories were told of the dead. No names carved into anything permanent. The highest form of honor was forgetting and moving on without sound. Over time, this ritual became law. Whole generations of mothers swallowed their grief like ash, burying not only their children, but also their pain. Because in the world of the Ghost Tribes, to weep was not a tribute. It was a trap at the edge of each year's final moon. The Ghost Tribes gathered in silence, not to celebrate, but to forget. Beneath a starless sky, the elders selected one among them to bear the weight of the tribe's sins. This would undergo the ceremony of the empty name, a ritual of complete erasure. It was not a punishment. It was a necessity. One soul emptied, so the rest could remain whole. The ritual began at midnight. The chosen stood before the elders, nameless, even before the rite had ended. No one called to them. No one embraced them. Their belongings were burnt clothes, tokens, even the fabric of their tent. They were then handed a simple clay mask, blank and smooth, to cover their face from that moment on. With the mask tied in place, they became the empty one. From then on, no voice would be directed toward them. No eye would meet theirs. They could not speak, and if they tried, the sound was ignored. The tribe acted as if the person had vanished, yet they remained in full view, wandering the outskirts, collecting bones, lighting fires that no one acknowledged. It was believed the empty one absorbed the tribe's hidden shame, their untold guilt, their unspoken regrets. By severing one's soul from the web of memory, the rest could pass into the new cycle untouched. The role was final. No empty one had ever returned to their name. No child dared ask what had become of them. Some were seen free as masked figures, watching from the tree line, or leaving offerings near the burial grounds. Others disappeared into the woods and never returned. In the end, the tribe remembered them the only way they could, by not remembering at all. And as the fire burned low, that night, they turned their backs not from cruelty, but survival, for someone had to carry the forgetting, so the rest could remain whole. Face tattoos and nose plugs, inside the tribal world that rejected beauty high in the folds of the eastern Himalayas, surrounded by pine forests and endless fog. lies the Zero Valley, quiet, green, and breathtaking, but within its peaceful silence once lived a people who chose to mark their women not with praise, but with protection. Among the Apatani Tribe of Arunachal Pradesh, beauty was not celebrated. It was feared centuries ago. Raids from neighboring tribes were common. Apatani women, known for their striking features and delicate skin, were targeted, kidnapped, sold, sometimes never seen again. In response, the tribe made a decision both brutal and heartbreaking. To keep their women safe, they made them unrecognizable girls as young as 5 were taken aside and held down. A thick, soot-black line was tattooed from forehead to the tip of the nose, cutting the face in half, and other lines slashed across the chin, crossing the lips like a permanent seal. These tattoos were applied with crude thorns and charcoal ash, each stab a warning. This girl belongs to the valley. She is not to be taken. But that wasn't enough. To further distort beauty, wide wooden plugs, sometimes up to 2 inches thick, were pushed into each side of the nose. Painful at first, they eventually became normal, even expected. These nose plugs weren't ornaments, they were walls. No outsider would desire what they couldn't understand. This strange ritual became the foundation of Apatani womanhood. A girl's transformation was not a celebration, it was a sacrifice. There were no flowers, no songs, only the hum of tradition and the sting of survival. Yet the Apatani were not primitive. Their irrigation systems were centuries ahead of their time. They turned muddy slopes into fertile rice fields using bamboo. Canals and fish farming methods now studied by modern engineers. Their harmony with the land was unmatched. But beneath that harmony lived fear. The fear that beauty, if left unchecked, would become a weapon used against them. The people of the valley believed in control. Crops had to be tamed. Water had to be directed, and daughters had to be hidden. Their culture wasn't shaped by cruelty, but by caution. Every ritual had a purpose. Every mark on the body was a message. To outsiders, the tattoos and plugs seemed strange, even grotesque. But to the Apatani, they were acts of love twisted into honor. A mother gave her child pain so she would not be stolen. Her father watched. The ink pierced her skin and fell to grim relief. Over time, the women wore their disfigurements with quiet pride. These were not scars of shame. They were badges of survival in a world that tried to take everything from them. But the world. Then, Zero Valley changed. The raids stopped. Roads were built. Outsiders began to arrive with cameras instead of weapons. And for the first time, the women with inked faces looked back. Not with fear, but with questions. In the depths of the valley, another ritual waited. One not about beauty, but blood. To outsiders, the thick nose plugs worn by Apatani women seemed like a bizarre ornament, but within the tribe, they were chains disguised as tradition. Beauty, in the Apatani world, was never a gift. It was a risk. It invited readers, provoked abduction, and shattered families. So the tribe rewrote the meaning of attraction. They turned loveliness into a curse, and protection into pain. At the heart of this belief was a single fear, that a beautiful daughter could be taken, and no one could stop it. Apatani elders believed the only defense was to change how beauty looked permanently. The method was extreme. When a girl reached the age of 5 or 6, she was taken to an elder woman. There was no ceremony, no blessing. Her nose was pierced on both sides, and thick plugs made of blackened wood were slowly forced through. They stretched the nostrils outward until the flesh formed hard rings around them. The larger the plug, the safer the girl was believed to be. This was followed by the facial tattoos, harsh, dark lines drawn straight down the forehead and across the chin. the skin swelled for days. Infection was common. But no one questioned the pain. The discomfort was a small price to pay for keeping their daughters home, alive and untouched. The nose plugs soon became a standard of femininity, not in the eyes of desire, but in the eyes of belonging. A woman without them was seen as exposed, vulnerable, even disrespectful to her ancestors. To be unmarked was to stand apart and to reject the pain that others had endured for generations. This painful ritual slowly became so ingrained in tribal life that even women came to defend it. Mothers handed down the plugs like family heirlooms. Tattoo patterns were chosen with care, and though the original fear that created the practice began to fade, the ritual survived, because now it wasn't just about safety, it was about identity. In the Zero Valley, survival had been written onto the face, but in time, what began as a mark of fear became a symbol of loyalty, and where once there was dread, there now stood pride, heavy, painful, and carved in wood. But in the eyes of the tribe, death held dangers of its own, and those dangers would never burn. In Apatani belief, death was not a release, it was a risk. A soul unprepared could linger, wander, even curse the living. Cremation, the act that burned the spirit clean in many cultures, was forbidden. Fire was too volatile, too final instead. The Apatani gave their dead to the earth, slowly, carefully, and always with blood. When death came, the body was wrapped in layers of cloth and placed inside a coffin made of woven bamboo. No nails, no metal, only plant and fiber, as if the deceased were being returned to the forest that gave them life. The burial never took place near the home. Graves were dug deep beneath sacred groves, where light barely touched the ground, and only the bravest entered after dusk. But burial alone was not enough. The journey of the soul required a companion, and that companion had to die too. A Mython, a powerful and prized animal of the mountains, was led to the funeral site. Sometimes, when wealth was scarce, a buffalo was used instead. The animal was not just sacrificed, it was offered. Its blood was believed to clear the path to the afterlife. Without it, the soul might drift, trapped between worlds. Bitter and confused, the horns of the beast were often buried with the body. The meat was divided among the tribe. But the act was not a feast. It was a contract. The community promised to carry the memory of the dead. In return, the spirit was expected to leave them in peace. Mourning lasted for days, sometimes weeks, with chants echoing through the groves. The family burned herbs to keep malevolent spirits away. Even after burial, certain homes remained off limits for a time, believed to be shadowed by the dead until rituals of cleansing were complete. To the Apatani, death had weight. It clung to the living and pressed down on the soil. Without proper rites, that weight could crush generations. Every funeral was a negotiation with the unseen, a delicate exchange between fear, honor, and release. But not all wrongs ended in burial. Some demanded blood in life, not death. Justice in the valley came not with courts, but with a blade of bamboo. In the Apatani world, wrongdoing was not punished with prisons or long lectures. It was dealt with publicly, painfully, and with precision. The tribe believed that shame was more powerful than pain, that a soul marked by guilt should be seen by all for this. They turned not to iron or stone, but to bamboo. The ritual of punishment was called your pangabu. It meant cut of truth for those accused of crimes, adultery, theft, betrayal. The ritual was swift, quiet, and final. There were no drawn-out trials. The village elders gathered in a circle. The accused was called forward, and the blade, carved from a single, stock of sharpened bamboo was placed into the hands of judgment. The punishment never aimed to kill. Death was too simple. Instead, the blade was used to slice the skin, a deep, deliberate cut across the palm, the arm, or the thigh. The wound bled slowly, staining the ground. The purpose was not to harm the flesh, but to stain the spirit. From that moment on, the person was known not by the crime, but by the cut dot in some cases, especially for repeat offenders or those who showed no remorse. The punishment went further. They were exiled, forced to leave a village and survive in the forest alone. The jungle surrounding Zero Valley was unforgiving. Food was scarce. Spirits were believed to roam after nightfall. Banishment was not just a sentence. It was a slow unraveling of one's place in the world. What made your Pung Apu powerful was its visibility. His scar was carried like a public record, seen at market, in rituals, at family gatherings. It whispered what the tongue no longer needed to say. The shame outlasted the sting dot, but the ritual also offered redemption. Once punished, a person could return to normal life. No one was forever cast out unless banished. The cut served its purpose, a warning, a wound, a second chance. The Apatani saw justice not as revenge, but as restoration. Pain was just a tool. The real punishment was in being watched, being known, and being remembered. But not all rituals were rooted in wrongdoing. Some were born from desperation, from pleading with the sky, from the belief that the rain listened, and sometimes it took the form of a frog. When the clouds refused to gather and the rice fields cracked beneath the sun, the Apatani turned to the oldest story they knew, a tale where animals could marry humans and frogs could speak to the sky. In the heart of drought, logic gave way to myth, and so the tribe would find a boy, and they would find a frog. This wasn't a joke or a game. It was a ritual of desperation rooted in cosmic battling. According to Apatani belief, frogs were messengers between the earth and the heavens. They carried water in their bodies and voices that echoed in puddles, streams, and rain. When the land was dry, it meant the balance had been broken. The frog had been ignored, and the only way to restore harmony was to honor it as kin. The ritual began with the elders selecting a young boy from the village, pure, unmarked by guilt, and still tied to the innocence of nature. A frog would be caught from a nearby pond, preferably large and healthy, as if chosen by fate, then dressed in ceremonial cloth. The boy would stand beside the frog while prayers were chanted in a forgotten tongue. The marriage was symbolic, but its meaning was sacred. Offerings were made. The frog was treated as a bride, respected, fed, and even given shelter. Some versions of the rite involved placing the frog in a basket lined with herbs and weaving the boy's name into charms. Tied to its back, it was believed that through this bond, the boy became a bridge, and through him, the tribe could plead for rain. This wasn't viewed as strange. It was survival. It was cosmic diplomacy. And when the rains did come, as they often did, days or weeks after the ritual, the tribe rejoiced. The bond had been honored. The earth had listened. The frog had spoken. These ceremonies were not about belief in the literal, but in the balance between all things, a human, a frog, a field of rice in the Apatani mind. Each played a role in the fragile system of life, but not all rituals ended in harmony. Some were forged in battle, and in one sacred festival, the valley itself became a battlefield, where blood was offered not to the sky, but to pride, every year, just before the monsoon. The quiet hills of Zero Valley would echo, with chants, drumbeats, and the sharp clack of bamboo against wood. The Dree festival had arrived, not just a prayer for crops, but a public stage where pride was tested in blood. For the Apatani, harvest wasn't only about soil and sun. It was about strength. It was about proving a man's worth with every bruise and cut dot in the center of the village. Rival clans gathered, each sending their strongest sons. Dressed in feathered headgear and body paint, the men circled each other like dancers. But this was no performance. Each held a sharpened bamboo spear and a wooden shield, hardened by fire. There were no referees, only the elders watched, their eyes judging not one, but who bled with dignity. The combat was choreographed but brutal. The first clash always sent splinters into the air, arms bruised, backs cut, spears jabbed against ribs, not deep enough to kill, but sharp enough to sting. No one cried out. To fall was shameful. To retreat was worse. Entrance was the true offering. A silent gift to the gods who controlled the rain. Each strike was more than just a blow. It was a message to ancestors, a promise to the earth. The blood that fell was believed to awaken the spirits, to stir the sky, to remind the world that the tribe still stood strong. When the fights ended, the wounded shared millet wine, bandaged one another's arms, and joined in the harvest songs. There was no lasting anger. The ritual combat was not about victory. It was about visibility. To bleed injury was to say, I belong, I endure. But even the bravest warriors could not stop the quiet fading of old customs. And as the inked women aged and the spears dulled, the tribe began to question, what happens when the rituals end? But the marks remain. In the 1970s, the Indian government banned the ancient customs of face tattooing and nose plugging among the Apatani. With a stroke of law, centuries of tradition were halted. The rituals ended quietly, without resistance, not because they were forgotten, but because the world outside had grown too loud to ignore. But what followed wasn't celebration, it was silence. The women who bore the marks, deep black lines, across their faces, wooden discs stretching their nostrils, were left in a world that no longer understood them. Their scars, once shields, became questions. In cities, they were stared at. In schools, their grandchildren learned history that didn't include them. For these women, the tattoos had never been fashion. They were armor. They were identity carved in pain. Now, they sit in the fading light of their homes, watching us. The new generation walks away from what once kept them safe. Some young Apatani feel pride in the legacy. Others feel shame. The divide runs deeper than skin. It cuts through memory, blood, and belonging, and in the echo of that divide, one truth remains. A culture that hid its women to protect them is now struggling to remember what was once too sacred to forget. The cannibal carvings of the Asmat Tribe, rituals that fed the dead in the swampy jungles of Papua's southern coast, where mosquitoes hum like warnings and rivers coil through dense mangrove forests, lived a people who carved death into wood. The Asmat Tribe, once feared across the region, believed blood was not just life, it was art, memory, and cosmic balance. Here, death was not an ending. It was a ritual, a symbol, a responsibility. When an Asmat man fell, his people did not mourn quietly. They listened for the whisper of his spirit, which they believed hovered, restless, until justice was served. No death was natural. Every passing was blamed on sorcery or spiritual aggression, and so every death required another. The Asmat did not bury their grief. They raised it into the air, towering wooden poles called biscarved with faces of ancestors and enemies alike. These carvings, raw and haunting, told stories of revenge, honor, and blood owed. They were not simple decorations, they were declarations of unfinished business. Until vengeance was fulfilled, the poles stood like promises to the dead. In Asmat belief, The soul of a murdered man could not rest until a head was taken in return. This wasn't just about retribution, it was about spiritual survival. The soul needed balance. Without it, crops would fail, children would sicken, rivers would turn against them. Headhunting was not murder, it was duty. Cannibalism followed, not from hunger, but from ritual. Flesh and bone carried spiritual essence. To consume an enemy was to absorb his strength, to silence his spirit, to bind his power to the tribe. The act, though horrifying to outsiders, with spiritual justice in the Asmat world, a cycle of life and death older than memory. Children grew up watching these rituals unfold. They saw skulls kept in homes, painted and preserved like sacred relics. They learned to carve the faces of the dead, not out of fear, but respect. Every blade stroke on wood was an offering. Every detail, a story of blood spilled and spirits freed. Art was never just art. It was weapon, warning, and remembrance. Even their drums told these stories, beaten rhythms echoing names of the fallen, calls to the ancestors, and songs that ended in war cries. Outsiders who entered Asmat land rarely returned the same. If they returned at all, the jungle didn't just swallow men, it remembered them, carved them into totems, and fed their names into firelit chants. But death was only the beginning. In Asmat belief, mourning was never passive. It was active. It demanded action. It demanded pain. It demanded more than grief. And for the Asmat, it demanded blood. Next came the skulls kept honored and never buried, because for the dead to truly leave, they first had to be seen. In the Asmat world, the skull was not a remnant of death, it was the vessel of the soul. To bury it would be to silence a voice that still needed to speak. Instead, skulls were displayed like sacred relics, resting in the corners of homes, staring from rafters, or nestled beside the living. Sometimes they were even used as pillows by those left behind, fathers, brothers, sons, hoping to keep the spirit close just a little longer. The Asmat believed the soul remained trapped in the cranium after death. It lingered, watching, waiting for justice or recognition, until it was appeased. Misfortune could follow sickness in children, failed hunts, storms that flooded the sago groves. The skull was not a decoration, it was a guardian, a warning, a presence. To honor the dead, skulls were treated with the same care given to the living. They were smoked over slow fires to preserve the bone, then painted with red ochre and ash, materials believed to carry spiritual power. Cowrie shells or beetle wings might be pressed into the eye sockets, giving the face a haunting beauty. Feathers and hair were attached to mimic the person once lost in this form. The skull was no longer a corpse, it was a memory that could speak. Each skull had a name, a story, a ritual. Elders whispered to them. Children were taught to touch them with respect. They were passed down like wisdom, not hidden like shame. In communal houses, rows of skulls lined the beams above sleeping mats, silently watching generations rise and fall. For outsiders, it was eerie. But for the Asmat, it was necessary. The dead needed to feel seen. To be forgotten was to become restless. And a restless soul was dangerous. Only when the right revenge had been taken, or the proper rituals performed, could the skull be finally laid to rest, sometimes hidden in the jungle, sometimes set afloat on a river, sometimes simply left to fade back into earth. But until then, it stayed watching, waiting, whispering, and from these hollow eyes, the past refused to disappear. In the beliefs of the Asmat, no one died by chance. Every death was an attack, an invisible hand guided by black magic or an enemy's will. Illness, accidents, even old age were rarely accepted as natural. Behind every death, the tribe saw a shadow, a rival, a curse, and when someone fell, the Grief that followed did not take the form of silence or prayer. It demanded blood. Mourning was not passive. It was a mandate. Families were expected to restore balance to the world the only way they knew how through. Vengeance without it. The soul of the dead remained trapped, restless and angry. Peace in the spirit world came only when justice was served in the physical one. Among the Asmat, the burden fell on the men, a brother, a cousin, a son. Someone had to carry the weight of retaliation to truly mourn. One had to kill, a head, had to be taken from a rival village, not for cruelty, not for conquest, but for spiritual debt. The cycle of life and death was sacred, and when broken, it had to be repaired with equal force. These headhunts were not random acts of violence. They were calculated, ceremonial, and timed with ancestral rituals. Warriors prepared for days. They painted their bodies, sharpened spears, invoked the spirits of past hunters when they struck. It was swift and brutal. One head, one soul set free. The severed head would be brought back to the village, carried high, greeted with chants and fire. It would later be smoked and preserved, a silent offering to the grieving family. Only then could the mourning begin. Only then could the skull of the original deceased be considered at peace. To outsiders, it was a cycle of endless bloodshed. To the Asmat, it was restoration. Revenge was not just a reaction, it was a sacred act of healing. The dead needed release, the living needed closure, and until balance was returned, neither world could move forward. For the Asmat, death always spoke twice, first in silence, then in the sound of a blade dot in the heart of the Asmat jungle. When a death demanded reckoning, the bis ceremony began. Towering wooden poles were raised massive, intricate carvings that reached toward the sky-like ancestral spines. Each bis pole told a story in curves and faces. Fallen warriors, betrayed spirits, enemies yet to be punished. But these weren't just memorials. They were promises, promises sealed in blood. The bis was both art and obligation, crafted from a single tree and carved over weeks. Each pole bore the weight of vengeance. One section might depict a murdered uncle, another the imagined face of his killer. Every detail was symbolic, and every symbol had a cost. These poles weren't finished when the carving ended. They were only complete when justice had been done. The ceremony that followed was more. Then ritualette was a spiritual demand. Dancers erupted around the poles. Painted bodies moved in rhythms that mimicked war. Drums throbbed like the heartbeat of the dead. Elders chanted stories of ancient feuds, while warriors circled the fire, knowing what must come next. The Asmat believed that the bis called out to the spirit world. But spirits did not answer lightly. They listened, they judged, and they waited for action. Before the ritual could end, a life had to be taken. Without blood, the poles were hollow. Without death, the village was cursed. So a headhunt followed, not as revenge alone, but as fulfillment. The death of an outside-ran enemy became the final stroke on the wooden canvas. Only then did the poles gain their true power, anchoring the spirit of the dead and restoring balance to the world. To the Asmat, failing to satisfy the bis meant inviting disaster, crop failure, sickness, floods. The land itself could turn hostile. The ceremony wasn't a celebration, it was survival. And in this cycle of carving, chanting, and killing, death was never just an end. It was a sacred agreement, one life taken, for one soul released. Among the Asmat, boyhood was not something that faded with age. It had to be cut away, beaten out, bled dry, to become a man. A boy had to endure pain not just to prove strength, but to carve himself a place among the warriors, the hunters, the protectors of the tribe. The initiation began with separation. Boys were taken from their mothers and led. Into the depths of the forest or into the ceremonial men's house, there comfort ended. Silence was broken by cries, not of sorrow, but of transformation. Stinging nettles were lashed across their bare skin, again and again, until red welts rose like tribal tattoos drawn by nature itself. The pain was not punishment, it was preparation. Elders used sharp shells to slice patterns into the boys' bodies, letting blood spill into the earth. Each cut was a mark of transition, each drop a signal to the spirits that a child was leaving, and a man was being born. The wounds were packed with ash, causing infection like swelling. But this was part of the test to survive agony without. Breaking was to prove oneself worthy of manhood. The rituals lasted days. There was no food beyond what was earned, no comfort beyond endurance. Sleep came in short moments, often interrupted by chants, warnings, or another round of nettle strikes. Fear was expected, but fear had to be swallowed. When the boys returned, they did not look the same. Their faces were changed not just by scars, but by something deeper. They carried themselves differently. Their mothers wept, not from sadness, but from awe. The boys had left in silence and returned as men who had bled for their place, for the Asmat. Pain wasn't cruelty. It was rebirth, and without pain. No soul could be trusted with the weight of a spear, or the ghosts that came with it. In 1961, the son of one of America's wealthiest families vanished off the coast of Papua. Michael Rockefeller, heir to a fortune and lover of tribal art, disappeared while collecting Asmat carvings. His boat overturned near the village of Otstunap, deep in the heart of headhunter territory. He was last seen swimming towards shore. He was never seen again. Official reports claimed he drowned. But the waters he entered were calm. His body was never found. What followed were whispers low, uneasy, and persistent. Whispers that said Michael made it to land, and that he was met not with welcome, but with ritual. Villagers told stories that didn't appear in news reports. They spoke of a white outsider, tall, young, unfamiliar, who came ashore just days after a respected Asmat elder had been murdered by colonial police. To the tribe, his rival was not coincidence. It was spiritual compensation. In Asmat belief, death had to be answered with death. Blood spilled by outsiders needed to be balanced, and the spirits watched closely. According to the stories, Michael Rockefeller became the offering. He was captured, killed, and consumed in a ritual that marked the end of mourning for the elder. His skull was painted, his bones split, nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. His presence, in that moment, was not seen as fun but as necessary. No solid evidence ever surfaced. No official confirmed the tale, but Dutch missionaries, anthropologists, and even local police heard the same. Rumors again and again. The villagers did not boast. They spoke with reverence. The act, if it happened, was not murder. It was ceremony. To this day, the mystery remains. The Rockefeller family never received closure, but the legend lingers in Papua's forests, in carved poles, and in the silent eyes of the skulls the tribe once kept close. Whether fact or myth, Michael Rockefeller became more than a missing person. He became part of the Asmat's spiritual history, written not in ink, but in bone. Skulls for the gods, inside the blood-soaked world of the Aztec Tzompantli Builders in the heart of ancient Mexico, where jungle mists curled around stone temples and obsidian blades shimmered in the sun. An empire rose not on trade or diplomacy, but on blood. The Aztec civilization, mighty and intricate, was built on the belief that the world teetered on the edge of darkness, and only sacrifice could keep the gods alive. At the center of their sacred cities stood something unimaginable, the Tzompantli, towering racks of skulls, sometimes stretching longer than a football field, lined the temple plazas. Each human had once held breath, memory, and name, now stripped to bone. They stared blankly at the heavens, a silent chorus of the dead. But to the Aztecs, this wasn't brutality, this was balance. Without blood, the sun would fall from the sky. Without death, the crops would wither, and chaos would consume the earth. The gods they worshipped were not distant or forgiving. They were hungry. Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and sun, demanded beating hearts to rise each morning. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, danced in shadows and craved fear. These weren't metaphors, they were mandates. Human sacrifice was not just ritual, it was survival. Prisoners of war weren't executed for justice. They were honored offered. Up a sacred fuel, the act of death, performed atop stone pyramids with obsidian knives, was seen as a gift. Arteries were rivers to the heavens, pain was praise, and when the heart was torn from the chest and raised high, it was not horror, it was devotion. The skulls left behind weren't discarded. They were carefully cleaned, drilled, and displayed. Mounted side by side, thousands stared out in endless rows. The Tzompantli wasn't just a display of power, it was a monument of faith. Every skull told the story of a god satisfied, a people protected, a sun that would rise once more. Children passed these bone towers daily. They saw death not as final, but as part of the cycle. Fear was normalized, suffering sanctified. The empire didn't shy away from terror, it harnessed it, shaped it, turned it into theology. And so, the Aztec world thrived, not in spite of death, but because of it. Every ritual, every offering, every skull was part of a brutal equation. Blood in, sun out, a deal struck with the divine through flesh and fear. But not all offerings were enemies. Some were chosen from within, pure, unblemished, and heartbreakingly young. The gods had other cravings still. In the Aztec Empire, warfare was not waged to conquer land, it was waged to harvest souls. Every battle was a sacred hunt, and the true prize wasn't gold or territory. It was the living body of an enemy, dragged home in chains, destined for the altar. To kill in battle meant nothing. To capture alive was everything. The warrior's worth was measured not by victory, but by how many skulls he could deliver to the gods. This was no metaphor. Skulls were a literal form of currency, each one proof of devotion and bravery. A man who returned with multiple captives was paraded through the city, honored with feathers, jewels, and advancement through the ranks of Aztec society. Some were granted titles. Others were allowed to take new wives. A few even rose high enough to dine with nobility, all paid for in bone. This wasn't a system of brutality. It was an economy of the sacred. Blood was the coin of heaven. Each sacrifice fed the divine order, and each skull was a receipt stamped in flesh. There was no higher ambition for a warrior than to become a Kuhoselotalan elite member of the Jaguar or Eagle orders. But entrance required proof, not years, of service, but captives living, breathing offerings for the gods. The skulls of these captives would decorate Tzompantli racks, immortalizing the warrior who caught them. In this culture, death was not the end. It was a spiritual transaction. Even families understood this. Parents wept not only for sons lost in sacrifice, but for sons who failed to bring home captives shamed, dishonored, forgotten. To climb in society meant climbing over the bodies of the defeated. The more blood spilled in honor of the gods, the more secure the future of the empire. Aztec priests did not preach about sin or morality. They spoke of balance, of cosmic debt, and the eternal hunger of the divine. For the Aztecs, prayers alone could not move the heavens, but a line of skulls fresh, clean, sacred could. And so the cycle continued. Warriors hunted not just for glory, but for spiritual payment. Sacrifice became salvation, and the currency of their empire was death. But building these bone monuments required more than warriors. It required craftsmen who shaped skulls into symbols, artisans of fear, architects of devotion. Behind every towering Tzompantli stood hands, not of warriors, but of builders, skull masons who turned death into architecture. These were not butchers or scavengers. They were artisans of terror, chosen for their precision and their deep understanding of the sacred. The Tzompantli was no crude pile of remains. It was a massive, engineered display, rows upon rows of skulls, pierced through the temples, strung on thick wooden poles, perfectly aligned to face outward. These racks stood beside temples like skeletal walls, sometimes stretching over 100 feet wide, towering in grim symmetry. Each skull had to be cleaned, hollowed, and drilled with exacting care, or it would fracture and fall apart. One crack, one flaw, and the spirit it honored might not reach the gods. Artisans developed techniques to preserve bone without rot. Some used lime and smoke to cure the skulls. Others used obsidian tools to make clean holes through the sides, ensuring each could be threaded with wooden rods. This was not simple labor, it was a sacred act. A broken skull wasn't just waste, it was a spiritual failure. The construction of a Tzompantli followed a ritual order. Warriors brought captives. Priests conducted sacrifices. Then the skulls passed to the builders. The artisans worked with eerie calm, often chanting quietly as they handled the heads. Each one represented a soul in transit, a tribute to Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, who demanded these gruesome offerings to continue his battle across the sky. Even the spacing mattered. The skulls had to be uniform, balanced in size and placed evenly to avoid drawing divine displeasure. If a skull was too small, it was pushed to the upper rows. Larger ones, often from fallen warriors or children, were given center placement. Visible from a distance, framed like art in bone. To outsiders, these racks appeared monstrous, but to the Aztecs, they were spiritual blueprints, diagrams of loyalty, fear, and cosmic order. Each rack reminded the people who they were, who their gods were, and what price was owed for protection. But beyond these silent monuments, the rituals roared on. Skulls were only the aftermath. Blood was the offering, and the festivals that brought these structures to life were drenched in fire. When the sacred festivals arrived, the air in Tenochtitlan thickened with smoke, incense, and anticipation. These were no quiet ceremonies. They were orchestrated displays of death, meant to awaken the gods and silence the doubters. In the great plazas, tens of thousands gathered, mothers with children, warriors in feathered armor, priests cloaked in jaguar skins, all fixed on the towering steps of the temple. The drums came first, deep, pounding, relentless. Their rhythm mirrored the heartbeat, growing louder, faster, until the very ground seemed to pulse as they sounded. The captives were brought forth. They did not scream. They had been drugged or broken, readied for the moment when their lives would become sacred fuel. High atop the pyramids, priests wielded obsidian blades sharp enough to slice flesh with a whisper. With one motion, they plunged into the chest and tore the heart free, still beating, still warm, and lifted it to the sky. Blood streamed down the steps like a red river, soaking the stone. The head followed, removed swiftly. It was passed to the Tzompantli builders waiting below. But this was not just death, it was performance, a divine theater, staged for the people and the gods alike. Dancers in skeletal costumes twirled around fires. Children tossed flower petals into the blood-slicked dust. Nobles toasted pork and cheered from shaded balconies. It was horror wrapped in ritual, violence disguised as holiness, and through it all, the message was clear: the gods are fed. The sun will rise, and the empire remains strong. These spectacles did more than please the divine. They controlled the living. The sight of so many lives surrendered in one day filled the people with dread and unity. Rebellion became unthinkable. Faith became unshakable. The festivals were not just religion, they were rule. But not all who died were prisoners. Some offerings were far more tragic, chosen not for guilt or defeat, but for purity. Innocence had its price, and for one God, only the tears of children would do. Among the most sacred and haunting offerings in the Aztec world were not warriors, not enemies, but children, small, unscarred and trembling. Their lives held no political value. Their innocence was their worth. For the gods of rain and harvest, purity was the required price. Tlaloc, the powerful rain god, was both giver and taker. When the skies refused to open and crops began to wither, the people turned to him with desperation. But Tlaloc did not answer prayers, he answered cries. He demanded the tears of children as a key to unlock the clouds. Weeping was not just expected, it was sacred. The ritual was considered incomplete unless the children wept as they were led to the altar. Priests selected them carefully. Orphans, sometimes children offered by their own parents, believing the sacrifice would bless their families. The children were dressed in ceremonial robes, adorned with feathers and flowers. They looked like little gods walking to their own end. The places of sacrifice were not always temples. Some rituals were performed on mountain peaks, where Tlaloc's spirit was believed to dwell. Others took place in caves, dark and echoing, as if the earth itself could drink in the sorrow. As the children cried, the priests rejoiced. Their tears were seen as signs that the gods were pleased. This was not hidden from public view. The community knew. They watched, and many believed. The lives of the few were exchanged for the survival of the many. In the Aztec mind, this was not cruelty, it was cosmic duty. But even in this deeply spiritual system, horror clung to the edges, because when innocence became currency, and pain became a divine requirement, no life could truly be safe. And as the children's tears soaked the soil, the empire looked up to the skies hoping the rain would come. But the bloodline of faith ran further still, and when the conquistadors arrived, they would find these towers of bone waiting. When the Spanish conquistadors first entered Tenochtitlan, they stepped into a world that defied everything they knew. Gold shimmered, canals glistened, and temples rose higher than anything they had seen in Europe. But it was not the splendor that froze them in place, it was the skulls, rows upon rows, tower after tower. The Tzompantli, standing like skeletal fortresses, lined the sacred plazas, thousands of human skulls, bleached by the sun, pierced through wooden poles and stacked like a wall of the dead. Some accounts claimed over 100. 0 skulls too many to count, too orderly to ignore, for men raised on Christian ritual and the soft echo of church bells. The sight was unbearable. Hernan Cortes and his chroniclers describe them in detail, jaws locked in eternal scream, sockets staring out in silence. In their eyes, it was a city of demons masquerading as civilization. They did not see sacred order, they saw hell. The Spanish mistook the Tzompantli for signs of barbarism, missing the spiritual logic behind them. What looked like cruelty was, to the Aztecs, reverence. Each skull was placed with care, each victim chosen with purpose. Sacrifice was not chaos, it was law. Calendar, cosmos, blood was the thread holding the universe together. To the Aztecs, the skull towers were not trophies of war, they were proof of obedience, devotion, and harmony with the gods. But to the Spanish, they became the perfect justification for conquest. These people, they told themselves, must be saved by force. By fire, by faith. And so the destruction began. Temples were torn down, skulls smashed or buried, rituals outlawed. What the Aztecs called sacred, the Spanish called savage. One empire fed on blood, the other fed on crosses. But the bones remembered. Even as the Tzompantli fell, their shadow lingered in underground tombs, in Spanish journals, in the silent mouths of broken statues. The skulls may have been removed, but their message remained. This was a world ruled by death, but not out of hatred, out of duty. Belief and divine. Fear. The whispering forest. Inside the haunting beliefs of the Baka tribe are in the depths of the Central African rainforest, where sunlight barely breaks through the thick canopy. The Baka people live as if stitched into the roots of the earth itself. Their ears are tuned not to the noise of modern life, but to something far older, a language of rustling leaves, creaking branches, and the low hum of the jungle's breath. To outsiders, it may seem like superstition, but for the Baka, the forest speaks, and those who fail to listen risk being swallowed by it. The Baka do not follow written laws or tribal codes carved in stone. Their laws come from the trees. They believe every trunk has a spirit, every breeze a warning, and every shadow the potential to shelter a curse. Elders speak of the forest as a living god, not one with a face, but with 1,000 unseen eyes. If the birds stop singing, it is said to be a sign. If the wind howls without reason, something sacred has been disturbed. From the time a child can walk, they are taught to listen before they speak. Silence is survival. The crack of a branch can mean a predator, but it can also mean the trees are displeased. A sudden gust, warm and unnatural, is believed to be the breath of a spirit passing by. In this world, intuition is not a guess. It is a form of communion. Hunters tell of moments when they freeze mid-step, sensing a pressure in the air. They say the forest can change its mood, from calm to cruel, and when it does, no weapon can protect a man. Many believe that the jungle chooses who returns and who vanishes, and some vanish forever, without a footprint left behind. Nightfall deepens the mystery. When the forest turns black and sounds become shapes in the mind, fear is not seen as weakness. It is considered wisdom. No one whistles after dark. No one laughs loudly. These acts are thought to insult the ancient spirits, who loathe arrogance. If disrespected, they are believed to curse a man's hunt, rot his food, or lead him in circles until he begs the jungle for mercy. Every fallen tree is a memory, every stream a whisper from the past. The Baka believe their ancestors became part of the forest when they died, and their souls now live in birds, roots, and the fog that clings to the soil at dawn. To harm the jungle is to harm family, and to ignore its signs is to invite punishment, not from man, but from something older than time. But among the whispers and warnings, there is also structure, a moral code guided not by fear, but by reverence, a system where wrongdoing is judged not by courts, but by the very air they breathe. Yet even within this sacred bond, there are spirits the tribe dares not name, shadows that do not forgive, and rituals that must be performed to keep them from crossing over. And at the center of it all, a force more feared than any animal, the spirit that must not be seen. In the silent heart of the Baka forest, there exists a name almost never spoken, Genji, not a god in the way temples describe, but a presence so deeply feared that even uttering its name during the hunt is said to summon death. It is not just a belief, it is a lore of survival whispered through generations, wrapped in silence and trembling respect. Genji is believed to watch the living from the breath of the forest itself, invisible, patient, and always near. It is not worshipped with offerings, or praised in song. It is hidden from, masked, and avoided. during the rare rituals where Jengi's attention is felt strongest. The Baka cover their bodies with wet leaves, mud, and the cold ash of burned bark. This camouflage is not for animals. It is meant to make them vanish from the spirit's sight. Elders speak of Genji not as a protector, but as a judge. It observes without mercy. Hunters say they feel its eyes in the shifting wind, in the stillness. That sometimes falls without reason. If a hunter breaks a taboo, if he cuts a sacred tree, leaves food to rot, or dares to speak the forbidden name, he risks more than a failed hunt. Some fall ill without cause, others wander into the jungle and never return. The tribe says these disappearances are not accidents. They are removals. Even the sound of laughter can draw its wrath if heard during the wrong hour. That's why hunting parties move in hushed steps, each action measured and respectful. Before entering certain parts of the forest, some men stop to whisper apologies into the bark of trees, asking permission. There is no room for arrogance under Jengi's gaze. The fear runs so deep that children are taught not to point into the forest. Pointing is said to challenge what hides there, a silent dare that Genji may answer. For the Baka, punishment is not always immediate. Sometimes it comes days later, a sickness, madness, or a sudden storm that levels the hunter's shelter. Among the Baka, Genji is the spirit that must not be seen, and certainly never acknowledged aloud. In a world ruled by spirits and signs, its power stands unmatched, feared not for what it does, but for what it makes disappear. But in a tribe that lives by listening, what happens when the punishment is silence itself, when the tribe withdraws, not in anger, but in ritual exile, in the Baka world, where sound is sacred and community is life, silence becomes the sharpest blade among this forest-dwelling people. Punishment is not handed down through force or exile. It arrives in the most devastating form of all, being ignored. When someone violates a taboo, no voice rises in anger. Instead, the entire tribe falls into a chilling quiet. The offender becomes invisible, erased without being touched. No one speaks to them. No one makes eye contact. Meals are served without a glance. Even the laughter of children, once shared freely, goes silent in their presence. It is not a momentary shunning. It is a ritual of emotional isolation, crafted to strip a person of their place in the human web. This punishment is called death among the living, a phrase that captures the torment of being physically present but spiritually severed. For the Baka, community is not just companionship. It is protection, identity, and connection to the forest's living soul. To be ignored is not simply to be alone. It is to be removed from the tribe's spiritual current, as though the forest itself has turned its face away. The punishment often lasts days, sometimes longer. During that time, the person begins to feel a loss deeper than pain. Stories are told of men who beg for forgiveness after just one night, collapsing in tears at the feet of elders. Some flee into the jungle, unable to bear the weight of non-existence. Others grow sick without explanation, as if the soul itself begins to wither. In a society where every breath is shared, silence becomes an echo chamber for shame. This ritual of exclusion is rarely used. It is reserved only for the deepest transgressions, violating a sacred hunt, disturbing ancestral sites, or disrespecting the invisible spirits of the forest. The Baka believe that punishment must cleanse, not humiliate. There is no yelling, no physical pain, only the reflection forced by solitude. And if the person returns humbled, the silence is lifted just as it began, without a word, but with a hand placed gently on the shoulder, signaling forgiveness. It is a haunting form of justice, built not on dominance, but on spiritual disconnection. To be cut off from others is to be cut off from the forest's breath, from its rhythm, from the ancestors who speak through wind and water. That is why this silence is feared more than any spear or wound. But the bocanosum wounds can only be healed with blood, and for the boys crossing into manhood, pain is not punishment. It is the path. Among the Boca, manhood is not granted by age, but by sacrifice, the moment a boy begins to show signs of change. A deeper voice, new strength in the limbs. The elders prepare him for a ritual kept hidden from strangers and rarely spoken of. Even within the tribe, it is not a celebration. It is a confrontation with pain, silence, and the invisible world in the heart of the forest. Where only the wind dares to speak, the ritual begins. The boy stands still, surrounded by elder men, each holding sharpened bone tools passed down through generations. With slow precision, small incisions are made across the arms, chest, and back, not to wound, but to release what the Boca believe must be drawn out, the impure spirits that try to enter boys during puberty. As the blood seeps, the elders chant in low, steady tones, not songs, but calls meant to confuse and drive away the unseen forces that linger near during this fragile time. The forest seems to still in respect. No birds cry, no branches fall. The jungle listens. The blood is then carefully collected and rubbed onto bark from a sacred tree known only to the elders. This bark is dried, wrapped in leaves, and placed into fire. As it burns, thick smoke rises, a signal to the spirits that the boy has paid the price for entering manhood. It is believed this offering shields not only him, but the tribe's future from spiritual decay. The pain is not hidden, nor is it soothed. It is part of the lesson. A Boca man must understand that the forest does not grant strength freely. It demands something in return. The scars left behind are not seen as wounds, but as symbols of belonging, proof that the boy has been seen and accepted by the spirits. Though no one speaks of the ritual afterward, its weight follows the boys. Into every hunt, every decision, it becomes a part of them, not just on their skin, but in the way they carry silence, in the way they listen to the forest without needing to ask. But pain is not the final step. There are nights when the air grows thick, and the tribe gathers to summon something far older, far darker, a force that moves not through blood, but through rhythm. When the moon disappears and the forest falls into its deepest black, the Boca gather beneath the tallest trees, not to celebrate, but to invite something they cannot name on these nights. When no stars break the sky, and the air is thick with unseen breath, they perform the Makondi, the dance that summons shadows. There are no instruments, only the rhythm of bodies slapping earth, the thump of feet against roots, and the haunting rise of chants that seem older than language. The sound begins low, like a distant storm rolling through the trees. Then it grows, faster, heavier, until it grips the spine like a warning. Every step, every turn is precise. This is not a performance. It is a ritual for crossing boundaries between the world of flesh and the realm of spirit. The Boca believe that in this moment, the veil between the living and the dead thins, animal spirits, ancestors reborn through form and movement, are said to appear in the firelight, not as hallucinations, but as guides. Some come as birds, others as large cats or monkeys, their shapes flickering in and out of the shadows cast by the flames. These apparitions are not feared, but studied. Their gestures are seen as messages, signs of what the forest demands next, or whom it has marked. Only those who know the rhythm are allowed to join. Outsiders who have witnessed the dance describe an overwhelming feeling, as though their bones are vibrating with a rhythm they don't understand. Some report a growing panic, as if the forest has turned to look straight through them. One explorer once claimed that the fire changed color during the dance, flickering blue, then black, before he was overcome with nausea and fled into the dark, among the Boka. This reaction is not unusual. The ritual is not meant for the uninvited. It is believed the forest recognizes who belongs and who merely watches, and if the forest decides someone does not belong, it will show them. The dance lasts until the body gives out all the fire dies. No words follow. The spirits have said what they needed to say, and the forest returns to silence. But there are some things that cannot return, some spirits that do not leave, and some deaths, the Boka believe, are not caused by time, but by invitation. Among the Boka, death is not seen as the end of life, but the beginning of silence. A silence chosen not by man, but by the forest itself, in a culture where the living speak with trees and listen for spirits in the wind. Death is rarely viewed as accidental. It is believed that the forest calls when it is time, and to ignore that call is to defy the balance that holds their world together. When an elder grows weak, ill, or unable to hunt, the tribe does not speak of hospitals or healing. They watch the signs, dreams that return night after night, birds that gather in unusual patterns, a sudden shift in the forest's tone. These are understood as signals. The spirit world has made its choice. The elder has been summoned. There is no discussion. No goodbyes on the chosen night. The elder is given a final meal, often warm roots, honey, and a favorite cut of meat, placed neatly beside them as they lie beneath the trees. A small fire is lit to keep animals away, and the embers are watched with quiet reverence. Then, before the first hint of dawn, the tribe vanishes. No footprints are left behind. No one turns back. The forest decides what happens next. Sometimes the body is taken by animals. Sometimes it disappears entirely, never to be found. The Boka do not bury their dead in these cases. They do not mourn with wailing or build graves. That would be seen as interference, a human attempt to control what belongs to the spirits. Instead, they let the forest reclaim what it has called home. This ritual is not viewed with fear or cruelty, but with deep, aching respect. The elder is not abandoned. They are released. Intervening by staying, crying, or resisting is believed to risk far more than one life. It could anger the spirits, break the balance, and invite illness or death to others in the tribe. The forest is patient, but it is never forgiving. Those who remain speak only in low tones afterward. If they speak at all, the memory of the elder is held in gesture, not words. A certain bark will be avoided for weeks, a favorite trail left untouched. In this way, grief becomes ritual, quiet, deliberate, and completely intertwined with the land. To outsiders, it may seem like abandonment, but for the Boka, it is the final proof of love, trusting that the spirit will be carried gently into the roots of the forest, where all voices eventually return, and so the cycle continues. Uninterrupted, the whispering trees stand witness. The silence grows deeper, and the forest watches, always watching. The Bactrian tribes, rituals of fire, flesh, and fear in the forgotten heart of Asia. Once at the crossroads of ancient empires, the Bactrian tribes held power not through armies, but through belief and yielding, blood-bound, and burned into the skin of generations. Nestled between the mountains of northern Afghanistan and the sands of Turkmenistan, they built a life-round ritual few dared speak aloud. Their name faded from history, but the remains of their customs whisper from buried altars, scorched, stones, and bones carved with symbols no scholar has fully translated dot in the heart of their desert world. Control was not taken, it was performed. Rituals weren't mere traditions, they were law, and punishment wasn't justice, it was survival. Pain was sacred. Blood, even more so. It is said that before the Bactrian child was given a name, the tribe first asked the spirits if the soul deserved one. Newborns were held near a flame, not for warmth, but for sign. Smoke curling in a certain shape meant life was approved. No sign meant sons, the child would be raised, but never spoken to by name. They were referred to only as Ashborn. Some lived their entire lives nameless, believed to be borrowed souls with no true place in the world of the living. Their sacred grounds were marked by soot black stones, believed to be meteors, fallen from battles between gods. These were not touched by hand, only by tongue. Licking the stones was thought to grant protection or punishment. If the tongue blistered, the spirits were angry. If it bled, the tribe prepared for war. Bactrian prophecy was not written, it was chanted in. Dust murmured over bones and sealed in flesh. The priests, known as the Veiled Flame, spoke with covered eyes, believing that sight corrupted the truth. They warned of enemies not by name, but by shape. A shadow with no feet. A horse that walks without sound. When such omens arrived, entire villages would vanish overnight, convinced their only hope was to disappear before being found. The tribe feared forgetfulness more than they feared pain. Memories were preserved not in stories, but in scars. Each family had a pattern of cuts carved into their backs, a kind of living language. To betray one's kin was to have the marks flayed off, removal not just of skin, but of history itself. Those outside the tribe called them demons. Those within called themselves watchers. Between sandstorms and silence, they held rituals by moonlight, sacrificing what they loved most, believing every offering delayed their extinction by one more generation, but extinction still came quietly, without battle. One day, the temple stood hollow. Fires no longer burned. Smoke rose no more. The Bactrians had vanished. Some believe they dissolved by choice, swallowing their culture rather than letting it be changed. Yet in distant villages, old women still whisper of ghost rites and bones that speak. And somewhere in the heat-shattered stone of the desert, the memory of fire waits to be stirred. Justice among the Bactrian tribes did not come from councils or confessions, it came from heat. When a person was accused of theft, betrayal, or dishonor, there were no trials, no pleading of innocence. Instead, they were led to the Yosaman, a flat stone altar warmed not by sun, but by flame. There, a sacred rock, black, volcanic, and marked with ancient carvings, was heated until it glowed. Only then did the trial begin. The accused was commanded to grasp the stone with bare hands and hold it until the watching priest gave a single nod. There was no mercy in this silence, only time for a truth to rise through the skin. If the flesh sizzled and blisters bubbled, the spirits had spoken. The soul was impure, the crime confirmed. But if the skin remained untouched, or only slightly reddened, a more sinister fear spread. For to survive the stone without injury was believed a mark of corruption far deeper than guilt. Among the Bactrians, flame was divine. It revealed what the eye could not. Blisters were not wounds, they were proof of spiritual interference, but a lack of wounds. That meant the accused had struck a bargain with the unseen. It meant a spirit had shielded them. Children who passed the trial without burns were often not celebrated, but shunned. Parents turned away in silence. Entire families collapsed under the weight of invisible shame, convinced their bloodline had been touched by something unclean. The burning stone was believed to feed on lies. Holding it was not simply a test, it was a feeding. The more a person resisted, the more intense the burn. Some whispered that the rock pulsed in the hands of the wicked. Others claimed it screamed. When held by those truly guilty, the air around the Yozo man always carried a strange scent-charred skin, incense, and something sweet. Like overripe fruit turned bitter, those found guilty were marked not by the tribe, but by their own hands. The scars left behind became warnings to others. Truth here was not spoken. It was seared into the flesh. And for the Bactrians, pain was not proof of wrongdoing, but of contact with something deeper, something beneath the surface of the world. Not all who were burned were guilty, and not all who were spared were innocent. In the scorched emptiness of Bactria's high plains, fire was never just a tool, it was a presence, an appetite. The tribes believed flame was alive, hungry, and watching, not a symbol of purity, but of judgment. Its spirits, invisible and restless, required flesh to remain calm. Without sacrifice, they would bring drought, sickness, and madness upon the tribe. Each generation, one child was chosen at the turn of the third moon, never the eldest, never the youngest. The chosen were brought to the Zrotham, a sacred pit surrounded by charred effigies and half-buried bones, there under a blood-colored sun. The child's or chest was branded with a spiral mark known as the Eshtuk, the iron borno, tribal symbol. Only the curve of fire's imagined breath, this scar, they believed, tied the child's soul to the flame and shielded the tribe from the wrath of the unseen. But not all offerings were symbolic. When famine struck, or strange illnesses crept into the water, the tribe looked beyond its own. Captives from rival clans, wanderers caught near sacred ground, these became offerings for a different kind of ritual. At night, in places where the sand burned even after sunset, the victims were bound, anointed in boils, and set aflame before the Sulentor, the fire altar older than any living priest. These ceremonies were kept from common eyes. Only select elders watched, cloaked in ash and silence. Witnesses were sworn to secrecy through a vow called the Shattered Tongue or Promise, sealed by cutting out a strip of skin from the wrist and casting it into the dying embers. Breaking this vow was believed to summon a spirit that burned from within, slowly turning the lungs to smoke. No words describe the screams. No carvings honor the dead. These offerings were not seen as murder, but necessity and exchange, brutal and sacred. Those who survived the branding carried their scars like shields, but those consumed by the flames were said to vanish from memory, their names swallowed by the spirits they fed. In Bactria, fire did not warm, it warmed, and when it demanded flesh, refusal was never an option. In the world of the Bactrians, prophecy was not written in stars or spoken in dreams, it was read in fractures. In the way bone cracked under heat, the Zonamek, or bone oracle, was always a woman, chosen for her isolation. She could not have living children, nor be claimed by husband or kin. She belonged only to the dead. Her tools were simple, the hollow bones of goats, deer, or birds scorched over sacred coals, the way they split crooked, checked. Clean the veiled messages the living feared to hear. The Zonamek would murmur over the pieces, tracing each line with blackened fingers, her voice steady, emotionless. She spoke not in riddles, but in certainty, and that certainty terrified everyone. A prophecy from her lips could shatter clans. If she named a harvest cursed, no seed would touch soil. If she named a man dishonored, his name was struck from family stones. But when she named an unborn child, a seed not yet born, as the root of future suffering, the tribe faced its darkest burden. Some others were hidden away, hoping secrecy could silence feet. Others were pressured to end the pregnancy before the curse could take hold. Infanticide, while rare, was seen not as cruelty, but prevention, The bone oracle never gave reasons, only declarations. Her voice held the weight of the ancestors, and none dared defy it outright. But prophecy came at a price, if her vision threatened a clan's standing, or dishonored a revered elder. Punishment followed. She was taken to the edge of the desert, where the sand burned even before dawn. There, she was buried up to her neck, no food, no water for 7 days. This ordeal, known as the Tarshic Purge, was believed to cleanse her spirit, to silence any corruption within. Some died during the rite. Others emerged blind, half-mad, or unable to speak again. Still, the tribe continued to return to the bone oracle. Despite the fear, despite the consequences, they believed her gift connected them to something older than time, something that saw not just what was, but what would be in some times. What would be was too terrible to allow. When drought scorched the land, all blood was spilled unjustly. The Bactrians believed it was not feat but betrayal. Somewhere, someone had spoken falsely, and to purge the tribe of hidden lies, a ritual was summoned merciless and sacred. It was known as Ezer-Tam, the trial of eyes and silence. Men were chosen not by rank, but by suspicion, a glance too long, a whisper in the wrong ear, a refusal to kneel during fire rites, and he could mark one for selection. Once named, the chosen were led to a wine-beaten plateau, where ash from past rituals stained the ground like shadow. There, in front of the tribe's oldest effigy, an eyeless wooden face scorched black, they were made to kneel. Needles carved from bird bone were dipped in resin and threaded with sinew. The men's lips were sewn shut, stitch by stitch, until not even breath escaped clean. The pain was expected. Entrance was the first step toward redemption. Once silenced, they were ordered to face the sun and keep their gaze locked to the sky. No words, no movement, no mercy. The Bactrians believed the sun saw all, and that it burned lies out of the soul. If a man flinched, turned his head, or fainted, he was marked a traitor, his spirit too weak to endure the truth. Those who failed were not killed. Death was considered release. Instead, they were exiled, stripped of name, of kin, and sent into the desert with no water. None returned. But even those who survived did not leave whole. Many emerged with blistered corneas, unable to see ever again. Some bled from the mouth where the stitching tore into flesh. Yet they were celebrated. Blindness was called Eshterek, the sun's gift. These men, broken but silent, were considered living shields against falsehood. They were given places of honor at fire rites, yet rarely spoke again. Even after their lips had healed, the Ezer-Tam was not punishment. It was purification. The tribe believed that silence opened the spirit, and pain brought truth to the surface. To suffer was to serve. In Bactria, silence was not peace, it was proof. To the Bactrians, death was not final, it was a crossing. But the crossing was perilous, and not all made it. They believed the soul, upon death, began a journey to the Mirrorland's shadow world reflecting the living, where every act committed in life echoed in reverse. The dead, if not properly guided, could return, not as spirits of comfort, but as forces of decay and madness. Preparation for the journey began with blood, animal blood, goat, ox, or even birds was smeared over the corpse, covering the face, hands, and chest. This blood was believed to confuse the soul, helping it forget its earthly body and follow the scent of the other world. The body, once anointed, was not buried. It was placed in sacred caves high above the sand, exposed to wind, time, and scavenging. Beasts. These beasts were not feared, they were part of the ritual. If vultures fed, the soul had been accepted. If jackals writhed, The soul was troubled, but still moving. But if the body remained untouched for 3 nights, the death became a curse. It was believed the soul refused to leave, clinging to flesh, watching. This was called Zauntek, the soul that looks backward. Families of the untouched were shamed. Elders claimed it was a sign of spiritual failure, that the tribe had not prepared the soul properly. Lineages could be cast out entirely, their names burned from stone tablets. Children were forbidden to marry. Water was not shared with them in some cases. A second ritual was performed, digging up the bones, crushing them and scattering the dust into fire to force the soul to flee. The caves themselves grew into places of fear. Some were sealed after too many untouched bodies had been found. Others became forbidden, said to echo with footsteps that did not belong to the living. Travelers passing through Bactrian lands spoke of sudden windstorms near these caves, and whispers in a language no one remembered. Among the Bactrians, death demanded participation. A soul abandoned could become a destroyer, and silence round the dead was never safeguarded by the 5th century. The fires of the Bactrian tribes had dimmed not by invasion, nor by plague, but by their own will. No battlefield marked their fall. No. Mass graves spoke of collapse. One by one, their temples were emptied, their sacred altars left cold. Entire villages melted into the desert wind, leaving behind only silence and scorched stone. Ancient scholars believe the tribes chose extinction, not in despair, but in defiance. Faced with growing contact from foreign lands and shifting empires, they feared their sacred rites' pain. Fire, bone, and silence would be diluted, misunderstood, or mocked, so they vanished. Rituals were buried, names erased, knowledge passed. Only in whispers, or not at all. Even today, desert children are warned. Never follow singing voices carried by wind. Never answer when called by name under a red sky. These are echoes. Elders say echoes of those who never truly left. The final record, scratched into the wall of a crumbling shrine, speaks like a farewell. We feared forgetting more than we feared death, and so we chose. Both their bodies made the tribe that burns their jaw. Inside the Baining's ritual of fire and silence, buried in the thick, wet jungles of Papua New Guinea, far from the noise of the modern world, lives a tribe that turns silence into law and fire into sacred. Trial. Among the Baining, the night does not sleep, it burns, and in that fire, men do not scream. The Baining tribe is one of the few societies on earth where imagination is not celebrated, it is punished. Where other cultures pass down tales of heroes, monsters, gods, the Baining reject storytelling. Creativity is considered dangerous. Emotions are trimmed like weeds, and children are taught that joy is not only useless, it is shameful. But when the moon climbs high and the drums begin to beat, a different kind of expression ignites. In the fire dance Seri and young men down, towering, hand-painted bark masks with wide eyes and sharp edges. Their bodies are stripped bare, but for the weight of tradition, flames crackle, rise, and explode. And then, without warning, they charge into the fire. The flames wrap round their legs, embers burst beneath their feet. The air smells of burnt ash and sweat. Yet no cries are heard. Pain must be swallowed. It is not courage they seek, it is purification, a violent cleansing of the self. The fire does not harm the worthy. It tests them. The masks are not just decoration, they represent ancestral spirits. Spirits that do not laugh, do not weep, and never tolerate weakness. Each dancer becomes a vessel for a silence, a symbol of emotional control. If he flinches, the shame is not his alone, it stains his family. This is not a performance for an audience. There are no claps, no praise, only the rhythm of the drums and the brutal dance of heat and shadow. The ritual is not optional. Boys must become men through fire, and to do so, they must erase the child within the one who once played, smiled, or dreamed. Outsiders who visit often label the Baining as boring, mistaking their emotional restraint for absence. But boredom is a mask that hides something far deeper, system built on fear, control, and ancestral judgment. In a world where silence means strength and fire means freedom, the Baining have created a culture where emotion is not only dangerous, it is forbidden. And for those born into it, even laughter becomes a threat. Because in the Baining tribe, even joy must be burned. In the world of the Baining, laughter is not innocent. It is a warning, a dangerous slip in a society that sees emotion as a crack in the human shell, something to be sealed before it shatters the soul. From the moment a child can speak, silence is taught as virtue. A giggle is met with a sharp look. A game is ended. Before it begins, toys are rare, and storytelling is avoided. Joy is not seen as a phase of youth, it is a failure of discipline. For the Baining, even childhood must be controlled. Play is not just discouraged, it is seen as a gateway to disorder. Children caught pretending, drawing, or inventing are corrected quickly. Creativity is considered a threat to the balance of the tribe. To imagine is to open the door to spirits that do not forgive. The elders believe that emotional expression attracts chaos. Strong feelings are like smoke rising into the ancestral world, where unseen beings watch and judge. These spirits, it is believed, were once human, but they became something else, something colder, something less forgiving. If a child cries too long or laughs too loudly, it is said the spirits may punish not just the child, but the entire family. Mothers teach their children not to dream out loud. Fathers rarely show affection in public. Emotional restraint is not a rule, it is a shield. To lose control is to risk spiritual exposure, and to be exposed is to invite illness, misfortune, or death. Even among siblings, closeness is cautious, bonds exist. But they are quiet, careful things. If a child grows too bold, too happy, the tribe will bring them back into line with silence, with shame, with withdrawal. Outsiders often struggle to understand how a culture can see joy as dangerous, but in Baining, belief, emotion is not a personal act, it is a spiritual offense. The louder the laugh, the deeper the risk. In this world, a smile is not a gift, it is a gamble. The flames rise without mercy, fed by wood that crackles like bones under weight. In the clearing surrounded by jungle, the Baining fire dance begins, but not with celebration. There is no cheering, no joy, only rhythm, only heat, only masks. Massive, handcrafted masks tower above the men's heads, woven from bark cloth and painted with jagged, animal-like eyes. These are not costumes, they are vessels. The dancers do not speak. They do not break gaze. Their faces are hidden, but behind the masks, there is no identity left to protect. As the fire rolls higher, the dancers step forward, barefoot, shirtless, silent. They charge into the flames not once, but again and again. Feet sink into coals, legs vanish into the glow. Sparks leap onto skin, and yet no one screams. To scream would be a betrayal not of the body, but of the soul's duty. This ritual, known as Ariang, is not a show of courage. It is a test of control so extreme that pain must vanish. The moment a man flinches, he fails not just himself, but the spirits watching from beyond. Fire becomes the judge, and only those who suppress every human impulse pass through it unmarked. There is no trance, no drug, no illusion. The fire is real. The agony is real, and the silence deafening. Among The Baining, individual desire is seen as disorder, to want, to dream, to feel too deeply that is the seed of chaos. The fire dance is meant to burn those seeds away. The man must become more than himself. He must become empty. Only then is he seen as whole. The masks play a crucial role. They are not decorative. They are sacred identities, spirits of animals, ancestors, and forces that cannot be named. The dancer becomes the mask, and the mask feels no pain. It demands obedience. It demands silence. Each movement into the fire is deliberate, stripped of emotion. The danger is not the burn, it is the shame. If a dancer hesitates, if he limps away or fails to return, the community does not forget. His family may carry that. Shame for generations. This is not a ritual for outsiders. It is not a tourist spectacle. It is private, brutal, and essential. For the Baining, it is how boys are cleansed of their boyhood, how men are carved from discipline not forged in freedom. Pain becomes performance, and silence becomes proof. But beneath the fire and smoke, something darker lingers, because those who do not pass the test are not just humiliated, they are spiritually unworthy. In the Baining worldview, there is no such thing as privacy. Every word, every thought, every flicker of emotion is witnessed, not by people but by spirits. They are called Tombu, not ancestors to be honored, not guides to be trusted, but watchers, judges, punishers. These spirits do not guard the living, they discipline them. To the Baining, the Tombu are a force that keeps order by fear. Their presence is constant, invisible, and merciless. When a child loves to love, or a man dares to dream beyond his duties, the Tombu notice if someone cries in grief or dances. In joy, the Tombu take offense. They respond not with signs or whispers, but with sickness, misfortune, and unexplained suffering. A sudden fever, a failed crop, a haunting sense of dread, all are warnings from the spirits. Even sleep is not a sanctuary. Dreams are dangerous territory. In the Baining belief, dreams are breaches of the mind's discipline, proof that a person's emotions are escaping their control. Those who dream vividly or worse, speak of their dreams, are seen as vulnerable to spiritual attack. The Tombu do not care for reasons. They punish the symptom. The fear of the Tombu is not loud. It is quiet. It is the reason voices stay low and laughter dies quickly. It is why children are taught to feel shame when they feel too much. Emotional restraint is not just cultural, it is spiritual survival. No shrine is built for these spirits. No offerings are made to appease them. The only offering is silence. The only defense is emotional obedience. Because for the Baining, punishment does not always come from the hand of man. Sometimes it comes from the unseen. In Baining culture, the most sacred moments of life, union and loss, pass in near silence. No grand declarations, no wailing farewells. Marriage and death are not marked by emotion, but by control. Passion is considered dangerous, grief even more so. Marriages are arranged through quiet agreements between families. The bride and groom exchange no vows, no romantic gestures. Affection is muted. If shown at all, the ceremony, if it occurs, is modest, often brief, sometimes without words. A union formed not through love, but through duty. The Baining do not believe love should guide life. In their view, love is unstable, irrational, and prone to awakening feelings that threaten spiritual balance. To fall in love is not a blessing, it is a risk. And so marriage is built on function, not feeling, a structure designed to maintain order, not fulfill desire. The absence of emotion is even more striking in the face of death. When someone dies, mourning is not expressed with cries or public sorrow. Wailing is forbidden. Tears are swallowed before they fall. To grieve openly is to shame the dead and worse, to attract the spirits who feed on unchecked emotion. The Tombu do not tolerate disorder. Even in mourning, they watch the living for signs of spiritual weakness and respond without mercy. Funerals are somber, but not in the way outsiders might expect. There are no stories shared, no heartfelt farewells. The dead are laid to rest with precision, with respect, but never with vulnerability. Emotional display during a funeral is seen as a fracture in the village's strength. Silence becomes the only acceptable language. This emotional restraint does not mean the Baining feel nothing. It means they are taught to bury what they feel, to contain it before it brings harm. In this world, sorrow is not soothed, it is hidden. Love is not expressed, it is controlled. And in every wedding, in every funeral, the same message echoes. Emotion invites danger. When Baining children were taken in by missionaries during the 20th century, what they brought with them was not just silence, it was fear. Not fear of violence, but fear of laughter, fear of play, fear of being seen feeling anything at all. Teachers noticed it first. These children sat quietly, avoided games, and flinched at joy. When handed dolls or building blocks, they often stared in confusion or froze. Some children would push the toys away. Others would dismantle them with eerie focus, as if trying to undo the emotion tied to them. To them, imagination felt dangerous, something forbidden. Psychologists, missionaries, and caretakers were stunned. In cultures across the globe, play is natural. It is instinctive. But these children had learned a different truth, that to imagine, to create, or to smile without reason could bring shame or worse. Punishment from the spirits that had haunted their earliest memories. What had been tradition in the forest now became trauma in the world outside. Even in safe homes, away from ancestral rules, these children kept their feelings hidden. Some whispered when they spoke, others avoided eye contact. Many showed signs of deep emotional blunting and inability to express joy, affection, or sadness in ways considered normal by Western psychology. And it did not end in childhood. As adults, many struggled with intimacy. Relationships were difficult. The idea of expressing love openly felt unnatural, even frightening. Years of emotional suppression had rewired how they processed the world. The silence of the tribe had followed them into every corner of their new lives. Researchers would later reflect on these cases with a mix of sorrow and awe. Here were human beings shaped by a belief system so powerful. It had trained them to suppress their own nature. The Baining had not just taught silence, they had carved it into the heart. Culture is not merely customs. It is a blueprint for survival, and in the Baining blueprint, survival meant obedience, restraint, and erasure of the self. These children, born into fire and silence, grew into lives that never felt fully theirs, and long after the flames were gone, the ash remained. Because when a culture demands the death of emotion, the price is paid by those too young to resist. The Aztec Tribe, ritual cannibalism, skull worship, and the laws of blood high in the misty highlands of North Sumatra. The dense jungles once echoed with war chants and drumbeats that carried a chilling warning. This was Aztec territory. Among the tangled forests and mountain cliffs lived a tribe whose name stirred fear, even among distant villages. The Aztec were not feared for their numbers, nor for conquest, but for what they did after battle. For centuries, certain Aztec clans believed that justice was not found in jails or chains, but in bone and blood. Those found guilty of betrayal, murder, or sorcery weren't just executed, they were consumed. Their flesh, believed to carry the essence of sin or power, was ritually eaten. Their skulls were sometimes hollowed and used as ceremonial vessels. These were not acts of desperation. They were spiritual duties. Acts believed to maintain balance between the living world and the invisible one beyond. 2. Outsiders, this was cannibalism. But to the Batak, it was sacred law. It was called pygmy, and it was reserved not for the innocent, but for those who threatened the moral and cosmic order. The elders spoke of invisible threads connecting spirit, land, and flesh, when one thread frayed when someone broke sacred law, it had to be severed with precision, and then devoured. To make peace with the spirits, the rituals followed strict codes. The heart and liver believed to hold a person's soul and truth were eaten by the village priest or chieftain. The bones were sometimes crushed and scattered in rivers to prevent the spirit from returning. The head, if kept, was placed in a high place, such as a sacred hut or altar, where it could watch and warn. To refuse this duty was to risk angering ancestors and inviting misfortune. These beliefs were passed down not in books, but in whispers, carvings, and blood ceremonies. Children grew up knowing that spiritual purity came at a cost. The dead were not always buried. Some were honored in death through consumption. The most feared of these were not criminals, but sorcerers, men who had broken the world's balance using dark forces. Eating their remains was not vengeance, it was containment. Among the Batak, justice was not about revenge. It was about restoring cosmic order. Pain was a bridge to understanding, death a ritual, and flesh a vessel for truth. This fierce devotion to spiritual order made the Batak tribe both revered and avoided. Even neighboring cultures stayed clear of their lands, believing that to cross into Batak territory without permission was to invite spiritual sickness or worse, disappearance. But not all who entered vanished in silence. Some brought back stories of skulls lining sacred altars, of villagers dancing under full moons, and of a justice system carved not in parchment, but in bone. And those stories were just the beginning. For the Batak's most disturbing laws of punishment were not hidden in feasts or shrines, but in the rituals that came when justice demanded flesh. In the eyes of the Batak, justice was not carried out with cold indifference, it was soaked in ritual, sealed in blood, and swallowed in silence. When a person committed the gravest offense, murder, betrayal, or black sorcery, the tribe did not simply punish. It purified. The guilty were brought before tribal elders, not for questioning, but for sentencing. Guilt was not a matter of doubt. It was a spiritual certainty, confirmed through ancestral wisdom. Omens or confessions under trance, once declared guilty, the condemned was marked not just as a lawbreaker, but as a threat to the spiritual health of the entire village. The execution was not rushed. It was orchestrated. Ritual chants were sung to summon the spirits of ancestors and sacred. Knives believed to contain the power of former chiefs were anointed with oil and ash. The act of killing was deliberate, often beginning with symbolic cuts to release polluted blood. The heart and liver, organs believed to house the soul and intentions, were removed with reverence, not cruelty. These organs were never wasted. They were prepared and consumed by the daughter, the priest, the judge, the spiritual surgeon of the tribe. In some cases, high-ranking elders also took part, believing that eating these parts allowed them to absorb knowledge of the crime, to understand its cause, and to cleanse the tribe of its shadow. For the Batak, this ritual was not about revenge, it was about restoration. They believed the body of a wrongdoer contained not just evil, but imbalance. If left unaddressed, this imbalance could spread like a sickness, inviting drought, disease, or madness. The ritual meal was an act of containment, binding the spirit of the guilty to those wise enough to carry its weight. Witnesses didn't scream. They didn't run. They watched. Some wept, not from horror, but from the release of spiritual tension. The ritual reaffirmed the tribe's unity. and reminded all present that justice was not separate from spirit. It was part of the soul's natural law. To the outside world, these courts seemed monstrous. But within the Batak worldview, they were moral, sacred, unbreakable. What seemed like brutality to foreign eyes was, to them, a divine procedure to repair the cracks in their universe. Yet not all sentences were alike. For there were crimes that even the cannibal courts viewed with deeper fear, offenses that touched the supernatural and demanded a punishment beyond the flesh. And in those cases, justice required more than death. It required the silence of bones. In Batak belief, death was never an end. It was a shift in form, a migration of spirit that remained close, watching, listening, sometimes judging. And the vessel that held that lingering force was not the body, it was the skull. Across Batak villages, skulls lined the interiors of homes, hung from rafters, or sat in stone shrines carved with ritual markings. These weren't buried or hidden. They were placed where they could see. Some were the skulls of honored ancestors, others of enemies or criminals who had been executed. But no matter the origin, each was treated with a strange blend of fear and respect. The Batak believed that a spirit's voice remained inside the skull long after the flesh had faded. These skulls could grant wisdom, ward of danger, or bring blessings if properly honored. Offerings of rice, tobacco, or even drops of blood were sometimes left near the relics. During festivals or ancestral rites, skulls were carefully cleaned and adorned with pigments or woven cloths, as if dressing the dead for a visit. But the relationship wasn't always peaceful. Skulls were known to bring misfortune if disrespected or neglected, illness, crop failure, or the sudden madness of a child could all be blamed on a forgotten ancestor, a criminal spirit left hungry, or a bone that had not been properly blessed. The tribe lived in a constant dialogue with these remains, never knowing if they were protectors or warnings. To the Batak, a house without skulls was spiritually hollow. These bones weren't decorations, they were reminders of justice served, of lives lived, of bonds unbroken even by death. Some families claimed to receive dreams or visions from the skulls in their home, messages whispered in silence, lessons from beyond the grave. Foreign missionaries and colonial officials saw only morbid trophies, but they missed the deeper truth. The Batak did not worship death. They lived with it. They fed it. They listened to it. For them, bones were memory, and skulls were the archives of the soul. But not all skulls brought peace. Some held curses. Some bore the weight of darker beliefs. Rituals meant not to remember the dead, but to trap them. And in those rituals, silence was not enough. The spirit had to scream. In Batak tradition, few things inspired more dread than the whisper of Pangulos, a sorcery. It was believed that dark magic could rot a soul from within, infecting not just the guilty, but entire bloodlines. A man accused of murder might still find sympathy, but one accused of black magic, his body became a map for justice. The Batak viewed sorcery as spiritual poison. It could wither crops, sicken children, twist dreams into nightmares. The accused were not questioned in secret. They were dragged into the light. The village gathered in tight, anxious circles. Elders read omens in flames and animal signs, and if guilt was seen, the punishment began not with the swiftness of death, but with a ritual of fear. Dismemberment was not chaos. It followed an ancient script. The right hand, said to cast curses, was often the first to go. Then the tongue, believed to carry dark incantations. Each removal was an act of cleansing, not cruelty. The Batak believed that by destroying the parts of the body believed to contain magic, they were saving the tribe from unseen harm. Sometimes the accused was tied upright and impaled slowly through the lower body so that the spirit would feel every ounce of separation from the flesh. To outsiders, it was unthinkable. But for the Batak, this slow death was a spiritual surgery. It was a way to extract evil without letting it scatter and take root in others. Children were not hidden from these punishments. They watched, learned, and understood. The unseen world was real, and it demanded vigilance. Fear, in this case, was medicine. If it prevented one future sorcerer from rising, then the ritual had succeeded. These executions were often followed by chants, fire rituals, and silence. The body was either destroyed completely or its skull was kept far from village grounds, bound in charms to ensure the spirit remained trapped. The ashes were sometimes scattered near crossroads believed to confuse wandering souls. In Batak justice, no death was casual, but sorcery brought out the tribe's deepest fears. It was not a sin of flesh, but of spirit, silent, invisible, contagious, and where sorcery touched, even friendship could be questioned. Blood bonds could snap. Entire families could vanish from trust. But there was one way trust was built again: through fire, pain, and blood shared by oath. Because in the Batak world, only pain could prove loyalty. Among the Batak, loyalty was not spoken. It was carved into skin. In a land where betrayal could mean death, and sorcery was believed to live behind the eyes of even the trusted, brotherhood demanded proof that bled, that burned, that left scars. Blood oath ceremonies were sacred acts. They took place before war, after alliances, or when two men wished to become more than allies, blood brothers, bound beyond death. The ritual began in silence. Two warriors sat across from each other, hands clenched, eyes locked, with a sharpened bamboo blade or obsidian shard. Each sliced open the center of his palm. The blood, thick and red, was not wiped away. It was pressed together, palm to palm, and held above a small flame. The fire below was not to hurt. It was to awaken. Smoke rose between them, believed to carry the newly formed bond to the spirits above. The Batak believed the ancestors bore witness, and once blood was mixed over flame, their souls were intertwined, not metaphorically but spiritually, eternally. In some villages, the ritual went further. Warriors would exchange slivers of skin, or cut pieces of their fingernails to bury under sacred stones. These fragments were believed to contain the essence of life itself. By exchanging them, they gave a piece of their spirit into another's keeping. This was not tradition for its own sake. It was survival in times of battle, when ambushes and sorcery were always near. Trust could not rely on words. It had to live in the body. Through these ceremonies, each man knew the other had endured pain in his name. That pain was their contract. The blood oath also served as a protection. To betray a blood brother was to curse oneself. The ancestors, it was believed, would turn away. Illness, misfortune, or death by unseen hands would soon follow. The bond was more than a pact, it was a thread. Women, children, and elders respected these bonds in stories passed down through firelight. Blood brothers were described as inseparable. Even in death, some were buried side by side. Others believed that in the afterlife, their souls would walk together, still bound by the oath made in flame. To an outsider, the ritual may seem brutal, but in Batak belief, pain revealed truth. It was proof that a man could suffer for something greater than himself, and yet even the deepest bonds could be broken not by knives or sorcery, but by a force far more powerful, the arrival of outsiders who demanded the ritual's end. By the late 1800s, smoke no longer rose from the sacred shrines. The skulls were hidden, the chants silenced, and the fire pits cold. The Batak Highlands, once alive with rituals carved in blood and flame, were now watched by foreign eyes that did not understand what they saw. Missionaries arrived, with Bibles and fear, Colonial officers came with rifles and ink-stamped orders. Together, they began to erase what the Batak had carved into bone for centuries. The turning point came with a case that shocked even hardened Dutch officials in a remote village. A man accused of sorcery had been publicly executed, his heart removed and consumed in accordance with ancestral law. The act was not hidden, it was witnessed, honored, and sung about. But to the Dutch, it was an atrocity. Soldiers were dispatched, elders were arrested, sacred artifacts were seized like weapons. The Batak called these men Raja Sisialagana, last cannibal kings. They were not monsters, but judges, keepers of a spiritual code that ran deeper than any written law. These kings were priests, rulers, and executioners. They believed justice required courage, and courage required rituals. The outside world could not bear to look at when these men were imprisoned or executed. It wasn't just power that disappeared. It was the center of a world. With them died the old laws, the ancestral chants, and the cosmic logic behind each ritual. The Batak were not merely colonized. Their universe was dismantled ritual by ritual, bone by bone. Mission schools taught children that their ancestors were savages. Churches labeled sacred objects as demonic. Over time, even the villagers began to whisper less. Skulls were buried. The sacred knives rusted. Fire rituals were replaced with quiet prayers to gods the Batak had never known before. But silence is not erasure. In the mountains, some families still pass down fragments of the old ways. Grandmothers speak of skulls that once whispered in dreams. Elders tell stories of the last blood oaths. These aren't shared with outsiders. They live in shadow, in the cracks between memory and fear. Today, tourists walk through Batak villages, admiring the carvings and snapping photos of ancient stone chairs where justice was once served through ritual cannibalism. Few know what truly happened there. Fewer still understand the logic that once shaped every wound, every offering, every death. The Batak's story is not just one of violence. It is a story of spiritual order, of laws made from fear and fire, of justice bound to blood. And now, it is a story mostly lost, told not through the rituals that once gave it life, but through silence. Because when a culture's bones are hidden, its voice doesn't vanish. It only learns to whisper. The spirit trials of the Babongo, inside Africa's most haunting tribal beliefs, deep in the untouched rainforests of Gabon, where mist clings to the trees like memory. The Babongo live hidden from the modern world. To outsiders, they are called pygmies. To themselves, they are simply the forest's children. And the forest is alive, not with animals or wind, but with spirits, unseen beings they call me, who walk in the spaces between breath and shadow. Their days are ruled not by clocks, but by visions. A single dream can change the fate of a family. If a man dreams of fire, it may mean his hut must be burned. If a woman dreams of a snake, the tribe might banish her child until the spirits are set aside. No dream is dismissed. Each one is examined by elders who serve not just as leaders, but as interpreters of the invisible. Every action has meaning. Every mistake may echo into the spirit world. When a man steps on a sacred leaf or speaks during a forbidden hour, he has not just broken a rule. He has invited wrath, illness, drought, or death may follow. The Babongo don't see accidents. They see warnings, and those warnings come with a price. Their language is a strange, whispering rhythm, filled with soft clicks and ghost-like murmurs. Many believe it was shaped to avoid disturbing the spirits that move through the trees. Songs are sung to guide the dead. Smoke is blown into the canopy to feed the ancestors. Even laughter is kept quiet during certain seasons. A loud laugh, they believe, may wake a jealous ghost. Children are taught from birth that they are never alone. The dead live nearby, watching. Ancestors are not memories, they are judges. When food rots too quickly or storms arrive unseasonably, the Babongo blames spiritual offense, not chance. To live among them is to live under constant observation, not by people, but by powers no outsider can see. And yet, these powers are treated with deep respect. Offerings of feathers, teeth, and blood are left in hollows of trees. Sacred pots are walked only in silence. The forest, they believe, listens, and it never forgets for the Babongo. Fear is not weakness. It is tradition, a binding force. That keeps them in line with the spirits, and nowhere is that fear more vivid than in the ritual that turns boys into men. A ritual soaked in sickness, visions, and pain. It begins with a root. A root that makes the soul leave the body. In the heart of the Babongo forest, there grows a root that does not heal. It awakens. The iboga root, sacred and feared, is believed to be the mouth of the spirit world. It is not used casually. It is taken only during the most critical moment of a boy's life, the passage into manhood. And once consumed, there is no turning back. The ritual begins at nightfall. When the forest falls silent, the root is ground into a bitter paste and handed to the initiate. He is not asked, he is expected. Swallow after swallow, the body begins to reject it, convulsing, vomiting, shivering uncontrollably. But the tribe does not intervene. This suffering is part of the process. Pain, they believe, is the door through which the spirit must walk. As the iboga spreads through the blood, reality begins to collapse. The initiate may see his own death. He may scream as visions of mutilated ancestors or burning huts flash behind his eyes. Some see themselves eaten by snakes. Others float above the forest, watching their body twitch below. These are not nightmares. To the Babongo, these are revelations, personal messages from the dead. The paralysis comes next. The boy becomes a statue, frozen in mud and sweat, unable to speak or move for hours. The elders watch, unmoved. They know this moment is sacred. If the spirit is unwilling to show itself, it must be forced out. The more violent the visions, the more truth is believed to be uncovered. This ritual is not a single night for some. It lasts 3 days. No food, no comfort, just the root, the forest, and the spirits. Only when the iboga has shown everything, every fear, every failure, every evil, is the initiate allowed to sleep. And when he wakes, he is changed, not just in body, but in soul. To the Babongo. A man who has not taken the iboga is still, blind, spiritually empty. His judgment cannot be trusted. His presence even considered dangerous. Only those who have crossed the line between life and death are seen as whole. And those who survive are never the same. But for those who disobey the spirits afterward, who betray the visions they were given, the punishment does not come from men. It comes from possession. In Babongo belief, no wrong goes unseen, not by human eyes, but by spirits who linger beyond the trees. When someone steals, lies, or breaks a tribal law, justice does not begin in the village council. It begins in the unseen world. The forest spirits, it is said, decide who must suffer, and their punishment is possession. Those accused are separated from others and placed under close watch. The body becomes the battlefield. The signs are clear to the elders. Sudden vomiting without cause, trembling fits, cries in strange tongues, or eyes that roll back in silence. These are not symptoms, they are evidence, proof that a spirit has entered, angry and wild, to punish the guilt within. The tribe believes the spirit will not leave on its own. It must be driven out. This begins with ritual cleansing. not symbolic, but brutal. The accused is forced to swallow bitter herbs until their stomach empties violently. Next, they are placed in a circle of burning leaves and thick smoke. As the smoke curls into their lungs, chants rise round them, calling the spirit by name, daring it to leave. If the spirit remains, the beatings begin, not to harm, but to cleanse all night. The body is struck with sticks dipped in ash and animal blood, believed to confuse and exhaust the spirit within. No rest is allowed. The suffering must match the sin. Once the spirit flees, signaled by collapse, sobbing, or unconsciousness, the tribe gathers to judge. If the person survives, they are allowed to return, but they return mocked. Their name may be whispered with caution. Their food may be blessed before shared. They are never seen the same. For the Babongo, guilt is not a matter of truth. It is a matter of spirits, and spirits do not forget. The deeper the crime, the darker the possession. But some acts go beyond even this, acts that awaken not just punishment, but ancestral wrath. In the eyes of the Babongo, marriage is not a choice. It is a sacred duty to the dead. Each child is born into a lineage carefully traced through generations, and with it comes an invisible contract. To marry outside this path is not just rebellion, it is betrayal. A betrayal that calls down the wrath of the ancestors. By the time a child reaches puberty, the elders begin to speak of matches. These arrangements are more than tradition. They are spiritual strategy. Families believe that the right union keeps ancestral spirits calm, ensuring harvest, health, and harmony. The wrong union, however, invites curses that stretch across bloodlines. Refusing a chosen partner is rare, but when it happens, fear spreads quickly. Illness in the family, sudden animal deaths, or unseasonal storms are seen as immediate signs of ancestral disapproval. The punishment does not fall solely on the individual. A sister may lose her child. A father may be wounded while hunting. Misfortune is seen as a chain reaction, set off by one broken link. To prevent this, many are pressured into unions they do not want. Each consent and love are often ignored. A girl of 12 may be paired with a man 3 times her age, not out of desire, but because their ancestors once hunted together. A boy may be forced to take a wife from a rival clan, to repair a spiritual debt long forgotten by the living. These marriages are sealed with rituals, blood smears, spirited chants, and symbolic offerings buried under the couple's sleeping mat, if the ancestors are pleased. Peace follows. If not, the couple is blamed for whatever darkness comes next. Among the Babongo, love is not the foundation of marriage. Fear is. Fear of ghosts, of punishment, of curses passed down like heirlooms. And for those marked by the ancestors' anger, even childbirth becomes a danger, especially if the child is born under a cursed sign. Among the Babongo, birth is not always a celebration. When a child is born during a solar eclipse, a lightning strike, or after a storm that cracks trees in half, whispers begin before the first breath. These are not normal births, the elders say. These are spirit-marked children, chosen not by ancestors, but by something darker. From the moment they cry, these children are watched. Every twitch, every silence, every fever becomes a sign. If a hunter is injured, if the river dries too soon, if a child nearby dies suddenly, the blame may fall on the one born under a cursed sky. The tribe believes that such children carry a spirit inside them, one capable of attracting chaos or misfortune. To prevent harm, protection rituals are performed. These are not gentle blessings. Sharp cuts are made into the child's skin, sometimes on the chest or back, to let the spirit bleed out. Ash is rubbed into the wounds. Their clothes may be burned, their toys destroyed, all to convince the spirit that it is not welcome. Some are kept in isolation during certain moon phases, locked inside huts or watched by silent elders. They are not spoken to directly. Food is passed through gaps in the wall. Their names may be changed, or never spoken at all. To name a spirit-marked child too early is believed to give power to the force inside them. In the eyes of the Babongo, a cursed child is not evil, only dangerous. A vessel for forces beyond control. And if the signs continue, if the tribe begins to suffer, the final decision may be exile. Or worse, for the Babongo, survival means sacrifice, and sometimes the smallest among them carry the heaviest burden. For the Babongo, death is not silence, it is judgment. When a person dies, their spirit does not rest. It lingers, watching, listening, weighing the life just lived. A peaceful death earns respect and ceremony. But when someone dies in shame, after breaking a rule, rejecting ritual, or mocking the spirit world, their end is treated with fear, not grief. Such burials are done quickly. Sometimes within hours. There is no singing, no firelight, no farewell chants. The body may be wrapped in leaves and buried in shallow earth, far from the village's sacred pots. The name of the dead is avoided. To speak it aloud is to invite the spirit back, a presence that may come not to visit, but to harm. The Babongo believe an improperly buried soul becomes restless. It may roam the forest, confused and furious, slipping through the huts at night, causing fevers, choking livestock, or stealing a child's breath in sleep. Madness, too, is blamed on these spirits. Sudden screams, shadowy visions, or the urge to flee deep into the jungle. To stop the haunting, sacrifice is required. A chicken's throat may be slit over the burial ground, ashes of burnt herbs scattered in extreme cases. An animal, or even a sacred object, is destroyed to feed the ghost and push it back into the soil. These rituals are not meant to honor the dead, but to trap them among the Babongo. Death is not the final word. It is a test. The living must prove they remember the laws, and when they fail, the spirits do not simply watch. They punish. Some say the worst huntings come from those whose rituals were rushed, and whose names were buried, but not forgotten.